All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to act as textual detectives to uncover how Dr. David Bauer's inductive Bible study methods reveal the completely hidden architectural genius of the book of Jude. In this investigation, we are going to look really closely at how the structure, the exact wording, and the historical references within this tiny 25-verse letter completely shape its meaning. We're literally treating the text like a crime scene, you know? We're looking for clues, hunting for patterns, and searching for that ultimate resolution.
Here is our syllabus for today's investigation. We'll quickly look at choosing the right translation, surveying the broad structure, decoding the chiasm, unpacking the contrast and comparisons, and finally, examining the final doxology. Let's map out exactly how we'll move from basic reading tools to uncovering an ancient, absolutely mind-blowing plot twist.
Section 1. Choosing the right translation. We absolutely must start by establishing our tools, because you simply cannot investigate an ancient text properly without the right magnifying glass.
Think of translation theory as two massive opposite extremes. On one end, we have formal equivalence. This is a strict word-for-word matching, where translators try to find the exact English equivalent for every single Greek or Hebrew word. Now, Dr. Bauer notes this can sometimes feel a bit wooden or clunky, like the New American Standard Bible, for example. Then, way over on the other extreme, we have dynamic equivalence. This approach doesn't obsess over individual words at all. Instead, it takes whole sentences or paragraphs and translates the underlying thought into English. At the absolute furthest edge of this side, you'd find a complete paraphrase.
But, as a textual detective, you really want the best of both worlds. Dr. Bauer notes that a mediating translation, like the Revised Standard Version or the English Standard Version, gives us exactly that. It's an eclectic approach. It doesn't strictly commit to being entirely word for word, and it's not completely thought for thought either. Instead, it balances those two extremes based on the specific inductive demands of the text itself. For us, it's the perfect lens for spotting those subtle structural clues.
Moving right along to Section 2, surveying the broad structure. Now, what's really interesting about studying a book is that we must first zoom out to the macro level before we get bogged down in the details. By slicing this short letter into its broadest structural chunks, we stay totally oriented and see exactly where the main argument lives. Dr. Bauer breaks it down beautifully for us. We have a clear salutation right off the bat in verses 1 and 2, which identifies Jude, his relationship to James, and his readers. Then we hit the massive middle section, verses 3 through 23, and that forms the entire core body of the letter. Finally, verses 24 and 25 give us a classic epistolary conclusion. Getting this simple timeline in our heads lets us know exactly where the heavy lifting is happening in the text.
Section 3. Decoding the chiasm. Let's move straight into the body of the text and see how this builds into a truly fascinating ancient literary pattern known as a chiasm.
So the crucial takeaway here is this X-shaped A, B, B prime, A prime architecture. Look at how Jude structures his argument. In Section A, he starts with a general appeal for the readers to contend for the faith. Then, in Section B, he gives the reason why, the secret admission of ungodly people. But then, and here's the genius part, he completely reverses the order. In B prime, he spends verses 5 through 16 specifically describing these ungodly troublers. And finally, in A prime, he circles right back to where he started, delivering specific exhortations to his readers about how to contend for the faith. Think of it literally like a mirror, or honestly, even a sandwich. This visual structure proves that Jude's primary concern is actually exhorting his righteous readers, not just condemning the ungodly troublers. Dr. Bauer points out that in ancient chiasms, the outer layers, the A and A prime, the bread of the sandwich, are the most significant parts. So even though Jude spends a huge amount of real estate describing these dangerous infiltrators right in the middle, the literary structure itself is shouting to us that his main priority is encouraging the faithful. Section 4, Contrasts and Comparisons. Building on that foundation, the text uses some intense literary devices, specifically causation with contrast, to build incredible tension. Jude fires off these rapid-fire historical comparisons to describe the current troublers who are setting up divisions in the church. He links them to infamous historical examples to highlight just how deeply contaminative their evil is. Dr. Bauer shows how Jude uses a recurrence of comparison here. He takes past descriptions of catastrophic divine judgment, like the rebellious angels, the total destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, or Korah's rebellion, and explicitly ties them to the present phenomena in the church.
He's essentially pointing and saying, look at these historical disasters. These are the exact same kinds of people sitting in your midst today. It builds an urgent causal argument. Because their evil is this dangerous, judgment is absolutely certain. And this brilliantly sets up a stark biographical contrast that runs through the entire text. Notice the massive divide here. On one side, the readers are holy, awaiting mercy, saved, and praying in the Spirit. On the other side, the troublers are ungodly, awaiting judgment, destroyed, and completely devoid of the Spirit. Dr. Bauer notes that this is Jude moving from the indicative, what is, to the imperative, what the readers ought to do. Because the troublers are so entirely corruptingly evil, the readers are commanded to be entirely radically different.
Now get this, the word kept is used exactly 6 times in this tiny book. As a textual detective, when you see a word pop up 6 times in just 25 verses, alarms should be ringing in your head. Dr. Bauer highlights how this one word perfectly captures the great contrast of the entire letter. The faithful readers are kept by God for salvation and commanded to keep themselves in God's love. Meanwhile, the ungodly troublers are kept by God for ultimate condemnation. It's just one tiny word doing massive thematic work to separate the two groups. Which brings us to section 5, the final doxology, the grand finale. This releases all that massive tension and the high expectations that were placed on the readers throughout the letter. After spending the whole letter telling his audience to build themselves up, to have mercy, and to literally snatch people from the fire, Jude ends with this majestic doxology. Now to him who is able to keep you from falling. It fundamentally shifts the spotlight away from the reader's desperate struggles and entirely onto God's preserving power. So here is the ultimate plot twist of our entire textual investigation. The readers are commanded to stay pure in a corrupt, highly contaminative environment. But frankly, doing that is humanly impossible. Dr. Bauer notes that on the basis of their own human power, these readers are absolutely not up to the task of dealing with these ungodly infiltrators. So, why give them these impossible commands in the first place? Because as Dr. Bauer's structural breakdown reveals, the true hero of the text isn't human effort at all, not even close. Verses 24 and 25 provide the substantiation for everything that came before it. The only way the readers can fulfill the exhausting exhortations to contend for the faith is by relying completely on the preserving power of the divine. The structure itself moves us from human peril to divine preservation. Which leaves us with one final, very real question. When you are faced with seemingly impossible demands in your own life or environment, where are you actually placing your trust to keep you from falling?